Years ago, when I was still a teenager, my friend Justin and I would often go longboarding at night. My friends and I were quite the night owls. We loved the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the roads or in the paths that we frequented. Even when using main roads, it would be very rare to see a car out so late in such a rural area. You could see and hear them coming from very far away due to their headlights and the noise of the vehicle disrupting the peaceful silence of the night. We were really into it at the time and would often ride upboards for miles and miles, sometimes not arriving home until the sun was up. One particular night, we decided to ride a few miles away from our usual back roads to take one of our favourite hidden routes. It began with a narrow, paved path that was the only piece of land separating two sides of a long lake. It would often sink under due to rain, and we wanted to seize the opportunity to use it before it rained and went underwater again. It was roughly 2 miles long, and it was extremely relaxing to ride through because of the scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to continue moving and turn into a very close path that leads directly into a densely wooded wilderness preservation. As we came up to the first hill, we looked down at the bottom into the blackness. We both noticed what appeared to be a tiny, moving ball of dim light down there. It moved so strangely, and it was extremely difficult to make out what it was. Rather than shine our flashlights down, we curiously watched it for a few moments, whispering to each other about what it could possibly be. All at once, that small light turned into multiple blinding lights and extremely loud revving sounds, overwhelming our senses that had become accustomed to the dark and the silence. Acting purely on fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we managed to run off path into a very dark, very overgrown hole in the side of the hill overlooking where we had just come from. We decided to hide in the natural dugout of this hill, hoping the plants and darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was happening out there. We watched our pursuers ride up to where we had originally been standing. There were 4 men, 2 on 4-wheelers and 2 on full-sized motorcycles. They were yelling at each other about something, but we couldn't make out what they were saying due to the distance we had covered. We felt safe enough to whisper very softly to each other, and we speculated as to who these people could be. Our first thought was that they might be park rangers of some kind, although we had never seen one here in the many times we had been through. Honestly, we doubted that this county had the budget or even the desire to have anyone patrol the deep woods at night. Besides that, these men were on vehicles entirely inappropriate for the paved bike trails. They were very angry about something. They called out to us for a while, yelling things like,
"We know you're out there. We can see you. Come on out."
We stayed silent and decided to call their bluff instead of running. Eventually, we clearly heard one of the men yell,
"Find them now!"
and smash a bottle. That had erased any hope we had that these were just park rangers. We watched them split up, each of them going a different way down the series of paths on their vehicles, including the path we had come from. It took us what felt like ages to even move. We were frozen in terror inside that dugout, watching the lights from the vehicles travel through the woods and paths, one of them already coming full circle and passing the point he had started from. I thought about calling for help, but I was too afraid to open my phone in fear that even the smallest amount of light would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach their farthest distance away yet, we finally summoned the nerves to get up and try and run somewhere far enough from these people to safely make a call for help. We ran as hard and as fast as we could through the woods. Since their headlights gave away their location on these paths, we would hide again whenever we felt they were getting too close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woods became less dense, and the fear I felt waiting for one of them to drive past us while basically only being covered in leaves and plants may still be unmatched to this day. Finally, we emerged from the woods onto the intersection of 2 main roads, far from where we had started. We ducked down into the ditch to call for help. When I opened my phone, I noticed I had recent missed calls from one of our other friends, Connor, who we were supposed to meet up with after our longboard excursion. I called him and frantically asked where he was. Luck was with us again. He hadn't given up on our plans despite us ignoring him, and he was only a few miles away and already heading in our direction. I gave him the names of the 2 streets we were near the corner of and explained that we needed picked up right away. He agreed to speed over to us while Justin and I waited in hiding. Thankfully, Connor arrived before any of those men did. We bolted into the back seats of his car, yelling for him to get out of there, and he took off. Relief doesn't begin to describe what I felt being safely driven home after everything we had just experienced. After explaining everything that happened to Connor, we ended up just moving on with our night, and we decided not to call the police. We figured they would be gone by the time any officer made it out there, and that we would only be putting ourselves at risk by admitting to breaking the law by taking those paths so late at night. I still have no idea what happened or who those people were. I've been told all kinds of theories from friends and family that have heard this story. Some think we walked right up to a huge drug deal. Justin and I later admitted to each other that when the revving started and we couldn't see what it was, our minds both went straight to chainsaw-wielding horror movie serial killers, so I suppose it could have been much worse. Frustratingly enough, whatever those men thought we saw that made them want to catch us so badly, we never actually saw, or never really know, I suppose. For a little intro, this would be about 4 years ago now. We had found our favourite camping spot for that summer. A 3.5 mile hike to a lean-to built along a scenic lake, part of a larger 20-mile loop. The trail leads past a spattering of small glacial lakes, with maybe half a dozen lean-tos built in the early 60s. Lean-tos being a public shelter, there are rules that apply. One being that you have to share it if more people wish to use it, usually up to a maximum of 8 or so people. The area offered primitive camping as well, but the terrain wasn't ideal, usually very swampy around the lakes and too hilly or dense in other parts. So this first lean-to became our spot. The first few times I went that summer, nobody happened to be there. We lucked out, it seems, because the following story is of the multiple people we met on one trip, but really it's about the woman who firmly believed that there must be a Sasquatch. This particular trip I took was in late August, which is a busy time for hiking in the southern Adirondacks. The typically treacherous dirt road leading to the trailhead had finally been covered in gravel, making the drive-in a breeze. When we arrived, there were more cars than normal, so we knew that someone may have already gotten to the lean-to first. Even though the rule is to share it, people usually keep going and don't even ask to if you are already there. I'm sure the idea of sleeping next to a stranger doesn't sit well with most. Others just may like the privacy or feel awkward asking. Not disheartened, we set off at a fast pace to try and beat anyone that may have been on the trail ahead of us. Before we even got a half hour into the hike, we ran into our first character of the trip. Now, I hope I can capture this correctly because we talked about this guy for the rest of the 2 days we were out there. He really didn't sit right with us, and it honestly kinda coloured the rest of the trip. He was a middle-aged, nondescript white man with a full-body hiking pack and a walking stick. There really isn't much about him physically that I can remember, except that he was dressed completely in sporty hiking gear, as if every piece of garment he had was from a store like EMS and he'd worn it once. And secondly, that he looked like a runner. Something in his posture and legs suggested it. As we approach him, he nods as if he's going to pass and then says,
"You guys just came from the A lot?"
Now, this was a weird question to begin with because the path we were walking down led from the A parking lot only. We nodded yes. He then asks,
"How many cars are in the parking lot?"
We didn't think twice about the question at the time, and one of us told him 7 or 8. We asked him if there was anyone at the first lean-to, and he said he had seen some smoke coming from that direction and thought he had heard some people there. He then asked if we had looked at the sign-in book. We could have seen if anyone was going there for the night if they had signed in. We said no, we hadn't, and we didn't even know that there was a sign-in book. His eyes got real wide.
"Oh, you two didn't sign in? You really should sign in so people know where you were last if you disappear or get hurt."
He then goes on about the sign-in book, really driving the point home that we should have signed in and how important it is. After this short rant, he goes on to ask us again how many cars are in the parking lot. This time it caused my friend to pause with a funny look on his face. I don't know, we said like 8 or something. As I sit here and write, I actually cannot remember why I did this, but after my friend answered him the second time, I asked him, "Did you sign in?" In response to this, he barked a short, mean-sounding laugh and looked at me sideways.
Nah, I never sign in.
Not much stands out about our parting, except that my friend and I kind of hurried away from this guy with an uneasy feeling. The questions he had asked stood out as very odd, and I started to wonder what the man's purpose was in even being out there. Why was he so concerned about how many cars were in the parking lot? And what was up with that sign-in thing and how he seemed to know where everyone on the trail was camped out? The rest of the hike to the lean-to was filled with talk about him and how we hoped the lean-to would be empty. Sure enough, as we rounded the final bend to the lakeside, we could smell the smoke of a campfire and we knew he had been right. As we near the lean-to, I call out so they know we are there and we don't startle them. Hunched over the fire is a man maybe in his mid-30s, and in the lean-to is a woman of about the same age. They had their equipment spread out across the inside of the lean-to, making it quite clear that they were set up for the night. There's not a tremendous amount of specifics I remember about our arrival. My friend and I introduced ourselves and asked if we could stay a minute while we ate and decided what we wanted to do. They seemed very welcoming and said by all means hang out for a bit. We ate, talked about possibly hiking back out and going home or continuing on to the next lean-to. The issue with the second option was that we had left a bit late in the day and the next lean-to was about another 3.5 miles at least. That would put us hiking there partially in the dark and we'd have no time to collect our firewood. This was before I came back in future years and discovered a good primitive spot nearby this same lean-to that would serve as a good backup if it was occupied. As it started to get dark and some rain clouds started to roll over the mountains, they kindly offered to share the lean-to with us. Pretty soon they were getting ready to eat dinner themselves and needed to gather some more wood for the fire. We offered to help and it was kind of a really cool moment, us with these strangers working together to perform such a wholesome and natural task. As we worked, we small talked and got to know each other a bit more. One thing I immediately noted during this time though was how guarded they both seemed. Both of them seemed really uneasy around us even though the talk was light and casual. Maybe they figured us being two young guys coming out to a spot in the middle of the woods that we were up to no good. Whatever it was, it drove the woman to turn to us at one point and say, "Just so you two know, I have a handgun on me." Right away, I took it as she was being responsible and didn't want us to get freaked out if we saw it. So I said lightly that I was into guns too and asked her if I could check it out. She took it out and showed it to me. Honestly, I don't even remember what it was. What I do remember is that she then went on to eat dinner and didn't put it away. She just rested it in her lap as she ate. Thinking that was a bit odd, I assumed she would put it away at some point. After their dinner, the boyfriend asks if we want a drink. They brought a bottle of whiskey. I'm excited because maybe they can finally loosen up a bit. Maybe we could relax and have a good night instead of this weird tension I've been getting from them. A few drinks in, I realize that the girlfriend still has the handgun out. Not only that, but she's holding it as if she doesn't remember it's a gun. As we talk, she's gesturing with it in her hands, waving it about. When she isn't animated, she just holds it loosely, letting it dangle between her legs as she drinks with the other hand. Over time, I start paying attention to her and the gun more than anything else, trying to make out whether she has her finger on the trigger, dropping small social hints that we were uncomfortable. Looking back, I do ask myself why we stayed, or why we didn't just say, "Hey, you don't have to have that gun out for the whole night." I guess maybe I sensed that she was a bit erratic and I didn't want to upset her. I also kept doubting that it was on purpose and maybe she was just a really irresponsible person. Because other than that, everything else felt normal. Either way, both my friend and I quietly got more worried as she swung her pistol all over the campground. Later into the night, and a half bottle of whiskey later, I could feel myself getting tired. The talk had largely faded out, and the four of us had resigned to silently staring at the fire and occasionally asking for the bottle. Suddenly, there was a tremendous splash in the lake right next to us. It sounded as if someone had jumped in, it was so loud. Startled, all four of us sat up listening intently. Another splash followed, but on the complete opposite side of us. The same sound, a huge crash as if someone had jumped in. We quickly started speculating what it could be. Frogs was my guess. There are large bullfrogs out here that will jump into the lake and sound like a fucking boulder while they do so. "It was a Sasquatch," the lady blurts out. We laugh and say, "Yeah, sure it was," but she insists. "Sasquatches roam that area," she says. "Their favourite thing to do is throw rocks in lakes to scare people." My friend and I laugh again, still expecting her to laugh with us, but she stays stone-faced and goes into a full rant on the local Sasquatch. The talk dies down after a few minutes and we all fall silent, listening once more. A third splash goes off, this time back around the original spot. We all look at each other. After a moment, she says, "I'm gonna let off a few shots to scare it," and before anyone could respond, she proceeded to empty her entire magazine into the darkness. I was sitting next to her and far enough forward that I could feel the change of the air pressure from the shots. We slept with them that night in the lean-to. Even when she laid down to sleep, she had the pistol. She had it right next to her left hand. I was laying at her feet. I kept thinking to myself as I drifted off that she could wake up in the middle of the night and shoot both of us in the head, and that would be that. We still managed to go to sleep though, and we woke up to them packing up their stuff and heading out early. I'm really glad that we came out of it okay, and I really hope that we never have to meet them again. So this happened to me just this week. Tuesday night was prom night, and me and my girlfriend had a whole day planned together. Part of that day involved a hike, which ultimately was just an excuse to make out. So we met at my house, and then she and I biked a few miles down to a hiking trail. When we got to the park, we locked up our bikes to the fence around the parking lot because there were no bike racks, and then walked up to the trailhead. We walked up the trail a bit, then found a log that was a bit off the trail and sat down. The park was pretty deserted. We saw one couple walking their dog on the trail, but other than that, nobody was there. There were only 3 or 4 cars in the lot. But as we were resting, we see this guy in a blue checkered shirt. For the purpose of this story, we'll call him Blue. He looked like he was in his late 30s or early 40s, was quite tall and skinny, and had a long face. He looked kinda like a stereotypical meth head from a TV show, though I didn't really get a druggy vibe from him. He walked by us on the trail. We were maybe 20 or 30 feet from the trail, and as he walked, he kept kind of glancing over at us. We were just chatting at this point, and figured maybe he'd seen us kissing and was kinda grossed out, so we dismissed it as him feeling uncomfortable. Then a few minutes later, another man walks up the trail. We'll call him White, because he was wearing a white shirt. I know, my names are really original. He was shorter and stockier than Blue, and looked like he was in his mid to late 30s. However, unlike Blue, his glances at us were much more pronounced and noticeable. He seemed to really be inspecting us, rather than uncomfortably passing us like Blue did. At this point, my girlfriend and I got a bit creeped out, but we dismissed it in a similar fashion as Blue. Now, here's where things start to get creepy. A little while later, White passes by again. This time, he's really taking a long look at us, turning his whole body as he walks away to stare. My girlfriend and I decide it's time to start moving, so we walk up the trail a bit, hoping that White will leave now that he was headed back to the lot. But as we walk up the trail, who do we pass but Blue, coming towards us? As we pass him, he makes a remark to us.
Be careful up there. I saw a couple of deer up the trail.
I knew the park quite well because my dad runs there often, and I know that deer aren't at all dangerous. That's unless it's a stag, which he would have mentioned, so his remark begins to set off warning bells. Something's not right here. But again, I dismiss him as just being an awkward person, and my girlfriend and I continue up the trail. But after 100 feet or so, she and I both get the same bad feeling that something is seriously off here, so we turn around to go back to the bikes. We try to talk about other stuff so that we aren't scared of what's going on, but as we pass a fork in the trail, we see Blue walking towards us again. He comes from behind us along the other trail and begins to tail us, walking quite close behind us. Uncomfortably close. The whole time, he's pretending to look at his phone, but I know it's just pretend. He's focused on us. My girlfriend and I pretend not to notice and talk about how we wish we could have found the deer and talk about experiences we've had with deer. We're almost to the parking lot now, and I'm itching to get out of there when who do we see sitting at the bench at the end of the trail? White. Now, the trail ended right where White was sitting, but a fork went sharply left and dumped us out a bit further down the lot, so I pull girlfriend in that direction and we walk rather quickly to the bikes without turning around. When we get there, I notice Blue and White standing next to each other, and then Blue starts walking towards us again. I'm rushing to undo the bike lock, and luckily Blue isn't walking too fast, so I'm able to unlock the bikes and get on. My girlfriend and I rushed out of there without looking back, so I'm not sure what happened to Blue. We don't know what they wanted with us, whether it was an abduction attempt or just trying to scare us away from a drug deal. Either way, creepy dudes in the woods, let's not meet again.